Thanks all of you for showing up here. I appreciate it. I'd like to thank all of you again, and of course my employer, Ivan. They have an open source division that they hired me into, and they were kind enough to send me here. Well, I had applied, but you know they picked up the tab, and I really appreciate that a lot. So I had a quick question before I really get started. Kind of show of hands. Anybody done operations, DevOps? Yeah. Okay. SA maybe back in the good old days. Okay. This is. It's good, and if I miss something for people who haven't had this experience, pop your hand up, or better yet, shout out, because I might not see the hand, and let me know. So here we go. Let's put on the ops hat. You may find yourself monitoring a large system. You may find yourself cursing up a blue streak. Anybody done that recently? You may find yourself bookmarking monitoring URLs. This is a relatively new thing, but not that new. You kind of have this monitoring thingy that you kind of use as the thing that you start from because you wouldn't really know how to do it from scratch. Has anybody done that? Yeah, okay. It can happen. And then you can find yourself hoping you saved that query, like that curl, that curl command that, that does cool stuff. And then you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here? And you can find yourself staring at a thing like this, and this is actually the happy part of the situation, where there's clearly labeled rows and columns in the thing that the monitoring stuff is spitting out. This is somewhat hacked upon for privacy. PGBouncer output. Who else has used PGBouncer by itself? Okay, so you probably have seen this console, like you probably have fired up your favorite SQL or your favorite Postgres command line client, or command client, I should say. And you can go to talk to PGBouncer itself, and you can see stuff like this. And that is good as far as it goes. Like it's good that there's a clear, concise, domain-specific language that PGBouncer provides. Not everybody has this nice feature. Everybody shout out together a system that doesn't have this nice feature that you've had to deal with. I'm not going to say one. No? It doesn't have a nice, clear, concise language in which to express queries? No. Okay. Sorry? Anyhow, there are a bunch of them out there. And even when you have something nice like PGBouncer, we kind of need a better query language than is usually provided. So it needs to handle big grids of stuff because, like, you know, we have this situation where systems are sort of increasingly many little moving parts, like sharp little tools, and then there's increasingly many of them, and then you have to you have to be able to sort of narrow them down and then look at them in groups. And then you have to be able to act on really specific ones that you meant to, and then you have to do that in like specific groups of them that you meant to. Like, you know, people talk about fleets, or I guess Kubernetes is very fashionable right now, where there's a whole bunch of stuff that's coming in at you as you're trying to monitor the thing, or in the kind of more specific case here, where you have to decide whether you're going to do something, and then do the thing that you meant to do. So I kind of divide this into two sections. There's kind of like the sensor. That's that part that we were looking at earlier. That's sort of the raw sensor data. And even for a relatively small thing like a single pgbouncer instance, that can really balloon. So I'll talk about why, or how you can make sense out of this flood of raw sensor data. You don't want to be in the situation where you're feeling like a prophet or Aldous Huxley or something, where their doors of perception have been cleansed and you kind of can't make sense of what's going on because there's just too much coming in. And then you have the part that lets you do the thing that you have decided to do, if you decide to do it, based on the thing that is not that flood of sort of cleansed doors of perception. And that I call the actuator. So I didn't actually do like robots or anything, and I'm sure I got these terms wrong to people who actually work with them, but that's kind of how I'm thinking about them. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the current sort of monitoring and control systems that we've got. So they tend to look really great, like that's good. At least they do look pretty great when there's a small number of moving parts in the system. Like, so the sales demo will show you some very pretty glass, and the pretty glass will have 5 whatever's on it, or maybe 20. Certainly not 50,000. And so, like, at the sales demo, this looks great. And then behind that sales demo, which could be live, it's fine. Nobody's. It would be counterproductive to have something that's really completely disjoint from the user experience when you demo. So people don't generally do that. Anyway, so in the back they have a web server, and it answers HTTP queries in a pretty straightforward fashion. That's how they start out. So they've got this thing that listens for traffic, and and the first thing they do with that is they have a syntax that looks like key equals value and key equals value, right? I'm sure everybody's deeply, deeply familiar with this one. And then long before they see the first customer, but we'll get to this in a bit, they notice that language is not sufficient even to do a sales demo, because when when there's any sort of propeller-headed kind of person in the room, they'll ask questions that lead to, hey, I need less than, I need in between, I need to specify more than one specific thing, and then somebody in engineering, probably somebody who raised this concern originally, gets told, implement this new syntax real fast. We got to get this out there for the next release because this is just unacceptable. And so a query language grows in this fashion, sort of iteratively. And eventually, in a mature system, what you wind up with at the outside is 10% of what SQL does. And that's, you know, that you can sort of see, like, as I walk through it, you can see how this goes down, right? Everybody does a web server. Every web server answers a certain very stilted kind of query language, which is the thing that's in the URL. And everybody takes it for granted that this is how you should start. And so, like, you know, initial conditions really can strongly influence what you see later, even decades later. Okay, so typical user experience. Dager Pooty, I think it's called, something like that. It goes off. Let's have a look at some sensor data. I just woke up. It's 3:30 in the morning. That bell is still jangling in my mind, even though I silenced it. Now I have to find that URL or dig out that file with the queries in it, or at the most extreme version, I have to actually build the query myself somehow. And let's say that, you know, we're under pressure. People are starting to hit me up on various communication devices, which is not helping my concentration at all. But despite all this, I figure out what things are going on, like what thing has gone wrong, why did it go, and then I want to take some action because this appears to be a thing that I have a pretty good idea that action will remediate, rather than like saying like that just waiting it out would be the best thing. So I've decided that I have to actually go do something. So then we get to the actuator part. Now this is maybe in a different part of the UI, or maybe it's in the same UI, and you got to be a little careful which button you push. So what was that command again for the control? What do you mean you turned off that subsystem? We are down. At this point, you could kind of understand if somebody shouts a Saxon-derived word that rhymes with puck. There has got to be a better way. And there is. I'm going to show an example, not too deep, of one that I built, and it's called PGBouncer wrapper. So this is the ideas behind this are sort of profoundly unoriginal. Back when the nice people were writing up Postgres, they talked about active databases, and this meant that sort of code was executing in there, and that was part of the idea. And then 1998, there's a paper by one Michael Stonebreaker on the author list. Mike Stonebreaker was the person who started the Ingress project and later the post-Ingress project, and that's how we got our lousy name. So it's Postgres. Anyhow, so they were talking about ways to use SQL on stuff that wasn't inside of the database proper, or at least stuff that somehow appeared that wasn't that, right? So they talked about, the 1998 paper talks about the virtual table interface. Later, the SQL standard says foreign data wrappers. We now have this fascinating thing that I'd love to dig into more. They're table access methods. So like storage things that you could picture those as not really having storage in any permanent sense. But they could, you could maybe read and write those and they would do different stuff. Anyhow, so I built a toolkit using Postgres as an application development environment and not really as storage. So the effect I wanted to have is that you fire up your choice of SQL client. I happen to like PGConf. Maybe that's just because I patched it a few times. I don't know. Whatever you like. I didn't want to couple it too closely to that particular one because I didn't think that part was important. So it's all in the back end. And what I built is an extension, one view for each show command that pgbouncer presents, one function for each of the corresponding other commands. This is a little bit embarrassing. There's a Perl program that I use. It's not part of the system as it operates, but it's a it's a way to sort of stare into the eyes of pgbouncer and figure out what things it's presenting so that I can update the views to the latest one. Far and away the largest category of bugs that I've gotten on pgbouncer wrapper so far have been, this column got added and it's missing, please put it in. So that's what that tool is for, but it's not part of the running system. You don't have to have Perl on your machine to make this go. So it's adequate. I've spent a little bit of time like maybe seeing about an upstream patch that would let pgbouncer do a little more detailed publishing of the APIs or the API that it presents. But it's really hard to mechanize that in a useful way or in a way that's just completely like plug and play with your tool that talks to it. I'll probably keep working on that, but I'm not sure how far you can really get before you eventually have to kind of hand tune something. So you can do stuff like this. And I don't know if that code is legible, and it's got more words than I usually put on a slide to pay attention to, but I'll kind of walk through them quickly. So select adder, count star from clients, group by adder, order by count star descending. So I want to see which clients have which clients are talking to pgbouncer and what's the top one, because that's the first place that I look for like where something has gone wrong. Obviously, if I knew more stuff, I might write a different query, but I can do this off the top of my head without like consulting any references. And that's what I wanted to make possible, is that I didn't want people to have to depend on things that were far from hand or that were unintuitive to them or that were hard to figure out. I also wanted to have stuff that you could kind of stare at and have a pretty good idea that it was doing the thing that you wanted before you ran it. Because I don't know about y'all, but if I have a bash script this long, I probably don't understand enough about it, right? Like there's many subtleties there as to what happens when which failure happens at each line of that code, and maybe at each string that's embedded in the code, because if I quoted it right or if yeah. Anyhow, so the thing is that for me anyway, I can look at a chunk of SQL code and I can have a pretty good idea of what it's going to do. And this becomes really important when you do something like this. That is the actuator part. So that's where those functions come in. So in this case, it's set default pool size to 300. And that's the set command that pgbouncer provides. And there's other ones, like there's one called pause, and that takes an optional argument, and it does the thing that you would expect it to do. At least I hope you would expect it to. If you don't, let me know. But this is now reaching your hands in and doing something. And this is the place where, groggy at 3:30 a.m. with a bunch of devices going off, you want to get it right. So you may have noticed that there's no locking going on here. Anybody see that? Okay, well, this theoretically this could get to be important if you're joining two of these views. And what I mean by that is that if you're, like, notionally, when you're in a real database, when you join two objects or more, you see a consistent snapshot of all concerned. Well, here you don't, at least in theory, because in the back end, show commands are getting executed, and there's no lock that says hold the state from the first command and then show me the data structures as they existed then for all subsequent commands. But the way I deal with this is that I don't. I just say, to a pretty good approximation, the commands are all executed in quick enough succession that it's consistent enough for the thing that you're about to do. So I don't deal with it, and I don't think really any other monitoring tools deal with it that way. Like if you have two panes that you're looking at, there's not a way to show the snapshot across time that I know about. So unless somebody gives me a really great reason why I should try this, I'm not going to try it. Okay, so into the future. Right now, this is kind of a bit of a specialty project, and I'd like to get it out to more people. So I was thinking about the PGXN extension network. Is anybody using that right now? Sort of for prod? Okay. So it is. It's probably worth having it in there just because that's a thing. OS packages for the debosphere and the RPM-osphere, and that would probably be enough. And another thing I was thinking about is that, well, you can do some kind of evil stuff if you're the Postgres super user. Like you can scribble on the file system. And I was thinking maybe there should be a way to scribble on the parts of the file system that are the that are pgbouncer's configuration. Maybe. I don't know if that seems like a really bad idea to everybody here. Not good. Indifferent. Okay. And then, of course, there's the really important stuff, which is the stuff I hadn't thought of yet. Has anybody got some ideas as to how the things that should happen that haven't yet? Things you might like in a tool like this? Yeah.
I'm relatively pgbouncer, and I'm familiar with a couple of the primary parameters that are tunable and that kind of thing. But what would you say was one of the biggest, maybe one of the main operational scenarios where you want to change a parameter on the fly?
Let me repeat that back. So the question was sort of, what are the operational parameters that you might want to tune on the fly that would be the in that scenario. I don't know about parameters necessarily. Like you could sort of picture some of those. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't mute somebody who had a use for the set command in operations. I didn't want to decide for people that they shouldn't have this capability, so I put it in. It's basically there, as far as I'm concerned, so that you're not hobbled. But a thing that you might want to do that you would want to do through here is, let's say, issue a pause command, because that happens all the time in, if you're in the happy place, it's an upgrade scenario. Like you've logically replicated over, you're going to switch to a new write node or pub node, I guess you call it, the one that takes the writes. So you hit the pause, you change out the pgbouncer configurations for the database, you hit resume, and suddenly everybody is talking to a new node that's the writer. And this is this pause feature is one of the things that I think is really the kind of killer application for pgbouncer. I don't really see pooling per se as the big win. I see holding a constant place where people connect to and letting the DB people handle the DB stuff behind it without harassing the people out front who don't care. So it gives you a stable endpoint, and then you can rejigger the cluster underneath it. So that's the kind of, does that get to what you were?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes?
So is this like a different server endpoint like wrapping around pgbouncer where you connected, like listening on a port? How are you actually, what are you doing? Where's it running?
Okay, so the question was, what the heck is going on here, like at the on the OS? Is that right? Okay. So I apologize for not describing this. This is what happens when you're deep in the project and you forget what you haven't explained to people. So what I do is I stand up a separate Postgres instance on the same instance that the pgbouncer is running on. It doesn't have to be there, but I don't like to hand out the pgbouncer console out to the world, and so I tend to have it like only answering on local host or maybe just local. So there's a separate instance of Postgres. Inside the instance of Postgres, there is pgbouncer and pgbouncer on install. Make sure dblink is there, and so you configure you configure pgbouncer wrapper so that it's talking to that pgbouncer console, and then what happens in between is sort of like it turns the select from views into show commands, it turns the other commands into like their commands with the what I hope is adequate protection against code injection. I haven't gotten any reports, but I did try to be careful about that. And so yeah, so there's like a separate Postgres server. It can be very lightly resourced because like how many people are ever going to talk to this thing? And it's not storing anything. So like its PG data directory can be in a tiny, tiny, tiny space. And yeah, so there's notionally pgbouncer on one machine. Its console is exposed to some other machines, possibly locally, possibly on the network. Those machines are running an instance of Postgres that may or may not have other things in it, but does have this extension installed on one database. And then it has it configured to talk to that pgbouncer. You could, of course, have more instances of pgbouncer, but I have not yet found a use case where that actually matters. Like if you're looking at several different pgbouncers at once, I haven't actually seen that in operation where it would matter, but I think you could. And that's kind of it. You're using Postgres as the so instead of like back earlier, I was talking about using an HTTP server as sort of the basic unit of what you're doing. In this case, it's a Postgres server as the basic unit of what you're doing. And that's a thing that I think admits a very broad applicability. So you could imagine sort of wrappers around a bunch of different kinds of monitoring tools. So I'm pretty sure that everything in computing is the same shape. We math geek types call it isomorphic to rows and columns at some level. And so basically, if there's rows and columns, then maybe we can get SQL to at least be able to read it. So huge amounts of sort of monitoring and much of control planes, I think, could be arranged in this way. And you could, of course, if you like to, or if it helps your sales guys, you could layer glass in front of that so people don't have to be writing SQL. But the sort of fundamental operator that you're, or the thing that you're really talking to is an SQL client, or it looks like a database. And I think this is a way to make things scale, make things comprehensible, make things transparent. See what people did, because like databases are usually set up, and I would set this one up to log everything. Like there's no good reason for it to not log anything, and you want to have the timestamps as to what verbs got executed and when, especially active verbs, things that mutate state. So yeah, I think this is a technique that's broadly applicable, and I think if people sort of, when they're writing systems, they start thinking about using Postgres as the sort of thing which mediates communication between your sensor network and or the things to be seen into and the seers of those things, that this is actually a thing that can really scale to huge numbers, get you very happy results. And sort of the cost of this, and I think this explains a little bit of why this wasn't already ubiquitous, is that when you talk with people whose like identity is very much wrapped up in, I guess it was systems administrator, and then it was ops team, and then it was this sort of DevOps thing, which is a little nebulous to me. But anyway, the people at the point of the spear who whose job it is to make sure the lights stay on and to turn them on if they go off, and to, yeah. So those people thus far have this tendency towards using some the tools that they're used to, which are very declarative. So it's like the bashes, the command.exe or PowerShell, or maybe curl, maybe JQ. Now JQ is a weird special case because it's like this weird little sort of Haskell-y thing for for JSON blobs. But they tend to think of these things as really small, sharp tools, and that's like the kind of thing that they're comfortable with. Whereas SQL is not a small tool, but I think it's much sharper. And I'd like to imagine that over time it will be possible to make the case to people that, hey, this is actually worth your time, worth your effort. Like I don't think I have to convince anybody in attending this talk that SQL is a fun thing to use, or that it's that it's easy to debug, or that all this kind of stuff, all the good things about declarative. But I think there is a case to be made to our compadres that really see themselves as the keepers on of the lights, that it's actually worth doing, and that it would really help. And it's gonna take a while, but if you're I think the case is compelling. I have saved my own bacon on several occasions with stuff like this. Some were like other kinds of tools where I hooked other things to SQL, but this particular one really saved my bacon on a couple of occasions, and kept our SLOs intact, and of course our SLAs, because the objectives tend to be less restrictive, or tend to be more restrictive than the legal agreements. At least you better hope so. But yeah, it kept us from getting out of our service level objectives, and that I think that's a good thing organization wide. I think that helps with morale. I think that tools that are sort of yet one more cognitive burden are bad no matter what good they do. If that makes any sense. Like if you have to memorize yet one more thing about yet one more tool. Whereas with this one, well, you know that there's views and there's functions, and you can find the list of them because you know how to do that. If you forget, it's like right there in the catalog. And I've tried to pack them with nice descriptions inside, because I believe that people should know what's going on if they need to. I've had people find bugs for me because I documented these things pretty well. Anyhow, sorry, I am rambling a little bit. I apologize. More questions? Concerns? Yeah.
I don't know where you're at in the development of the tool. Is it production ready now?
I have, the question was, is it production ready? Well, those sort of sketchy tales that I told about SLOs, those were those were me using it in production. So, and putting my job on the line to do it. So yeah, I get the occasional bug report, and I have to assume that it's from somebody that isn't just toying around with it, because they say, this bad thing happened. Well, that only happened once, but anyhow. I would say it is. But I would like to, this is one of the things, is that technically it is. But there's a whole infrastructure of distributing software and getting things approved and all that kind of fun stuff. And that was part of why I had that other stuff on the list, as to sort of make it easier for somebody else to go I am installing this on the pgbouncer machine from our usual repo because it helps us do that. So there's that part, and then if somebody wants to integrate it into a bigger system, I want that process to be very straightforward. Anybody else? Alrighty, well, please fill in your feedback forms. You can reach me through the contact stuff on the conference website. I will be around the rest of today, all day, like I'm not taking off early or anything. And if you think of anything then or later, it's on GitHub. My name is David Fetter, and that's the username, and the project is called pgbouncer _wrapper. And I do try to be responsive quickly to reaching out on GitHub. You can reach me at Ivan, david.fetter@ivan.io. And yeah, if there's, if you send me a carrier pigeon, I'll try to read it. Anyway, so thank you all for coming here. Really appreciate it.